From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I think it's going to pass, and it's going to be very popular. It's going to have lots of adjustments before it ends. But the end result would be a very, very massive, the largest in the history of our country, tax cut.
In a party-line vote, the Senate Budget Committee passes Trump's $1.5 trillion tax bill that includes major tax cuts for the richest Americans and a provision to repeal the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate. A full vote in the Senate could come as early as this week. We'll talk about what's in the bill and look at how 40 graduate student walkouts are planned around the country to protest a measure in the House bill that would reclassify tuition waivers as taxable income, amounting to a pay cut of thousands of dollars. Then President Trump attempts to insult Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren by referring to her as Pocahontas during a White House ceremony honoring Navajo code talkers for their service during World War II.
We have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas. But you know what? I like you because you are special. You are special people.
We'll talk to Cherokee lawyer and writer Mary Catherine Nagel. She'll share the story of Pocahontas. And we'll look at the case of Olivia Lone Bear, yet another Native American woman who's gone missing in the oil fields of North Dakota. Then to Honduras, where tensions are rising as the country's electoral court refuses to release results from Sunday's election that showed opposition candidate may defeat the conservative president.
We've sent out an urgent alert. For us, it's critical. It's very serious. This situation where the conspiratorial traitors of the government are practically carrying out a coup d'etat.
We'll speak with an election observer just back from Honduras. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Republicans are rapidly pushing forward with their efforts to pass President Trump's tax plan, which would overhaul the code in order to shower billions of dollars in tax cuts upon the richest Americans, including President Trump's own family. On Tuesday, the Senate Budget Committee passed the Senate version of the plan, with all Republicans on the panel voting for it, all Democrats voting against. Protesters disrupted the committee hearing Tuesday with chants of "Kill the bill, don't kill us." Several people were arrested. The plan will now go to the full Senate for a vote as early as Thursday. The Senate bill slashes the corporate tax rate and gives further tax cuts to wealthy business owners. It would also repeal a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, the requirement that most Americans have health insurance. Experts say recalling this provision, known as the individual mandate, would cause the cost of health insurance to skyrocket. A House version of the bill would also reclassify tuition waivers for graduate students as taxable income, meaning graduate students could be saddled with massive tax bills. Graduate students at dozens of universities across the country are planning walkouts today to protest the measure, which they say would make higher education even more unaffordable. We'll have more on the tax bill after headlines. North Korea fired an intercontinental ballistic missile Tuesday, its first missile launch in 2 months. The missile flew nearly 600 miles before landing in the Sea of Japan. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said it was the furthest missile launched by North Korea to date. This is South Korean President Moon Jae-in.
North Korea fired a ballistic missile today. This action does not only increase tension on the Korean peninsula, but gravely endangers the international peace and security. We strongly condemn North Korea in continuing such reckless behavior.
The launch comes after President Trump escalated diplomatic tensions by putting North Korea back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. President Trump has also threatened to totally destroy North Korea, a nation of 25 million people. As nuclear tensions between the U.S. and North Korea continue to rise, Hawaii is preparing to test its early warning system aimed at warning residents about a nuclear attack. The test, slated for Friday, will be the first time Hawaii has deployed the warning system since the 1990s after the Cold War ended. This is Hawaii's Administrator of Emergency Management.
The basic guidance, again, if you hear this, is get inside, and stay tuned. Now, it sounds simple, but when you have that short a time, about 12 minutes after we get the notification, 12, 13 minutes,
The New York Times is reporting President Trump is continuing to promote a racist and discredited conspiracy theory that President Barack Obama was not born in the United States and therefore not eligible to be president. President Obama was born in the U.S. state of Hawaii in 1961. But for years, President Trump has been a leader of the so-called birther movement, a far right-wing fringe group, mostly of white supremacists who question the validity of President Obama's U.S. birth certificate. Tensions are rising in Honduras, where the Electoral Court still hasn't released the full results from Sunday's presidential election. On Tuesday, the court released new partial results showing the gap between the opposition candidate, Salvador Nasralla, and the conservative president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, has narrowed, with Nasralla now leading by only 2 percentage points. Supporters and members of Nasralla's coalition party, called the Alliance Against the Dictatorship, are accusing the government of trying to rig the vote in favor of President Hernandez, who is backed by the United States. This is Guillermo Valle, the head of the Innovation and Unity Party, which is part of the coalition.
We've sent out an urgent alert. For us, it's critical. It's very serious. This situation where the conspiratorial traitors of the government are practically carrying out a coup d'etat.
We'll have more on the situation in Honduras later in the broadcast. The Pentagon has admitted there are thousands more U.S. troops in Iraq than previously acknowledged. In its quarterly report, the Pentagon said there were nearly 9,000 U.S. troops in Iraq, more than 3,000 more troops than the military has officially acknowledged. In New York City, lawyers with the Legal Aid Society staged a walkout at the Brooklyn Criminal Court Tuesday after Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents snatched a man from the hallway of the courthouse and took him into ICE custody.
ICE has got to go. Hell no, ICE has got to go. Hell no, ICE has got to go. Hell no.
Immigration arrests at courthouses nationwide have surged since President Trump took office. The Immigrant Defense Project says the man, Genaro Hernandez, is at least the 70th person arrested by ICE inside or just outside a New York City courthouse. The lawyers are demanding ICE agents not carry out arrests inside or in the vicinity of courthouses. Pope Francis gave a highly anticipated speech in Burma Tuesday in which he chose not to speak publicly about the Burmese military's ethnic cleansing campaign against the Muslim Rohingyas in the majority Buddhist nation. More than 600,000 Rohingyas have fled Burma into neighboring Bangladesh amidst the military's campaign of murder, rape, and arson. On Tuesday, Pope Francis did not even say the name Rohingya after church leaders warned him that using the highly polarized word could aggravate the Burmese military. The Pope has also met in private with the head of Burma's armed forces, as well as Burma's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. He's slated to meet with Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh later in the week. Back in the United States, longtime NBC Today Show anchor Matt Lauer has been fired after he was accused of inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. NBC News chairman Andrew Lack said, quote, "While it is the first complaint about his behavior in the over 20 years he's been at NBC News, we were also presented with reason to believe this may not have been an isolated incident." Meanwhile, there's growing speculation that Michigan Democratic Congressmember John Conyers may step down as he faces additional accusations of sexual harassment. Several congressional Black Caucus members are urging him to resign as another woman has come forward to accuse the longtime civil rights leader of sexual harassment. Former staff member Deanna Marr says he repeatedly made unwanted sexual advances on her, including once removing all his clothes in front of her while the two were staying in a 2-bedroom hotel suite while attending a 3-day Congressional Black Caucus event. Conyers also reportedly settled a harassment complaint in 2015, paying out $27,000 to a woman who alleged she was fired from his Washington staff because she rejected his sexual advances. And Illinois Democratic Congressmember Luis Gutierrez announced Tuesday he will not seek re-election because he instead plans to focus on rebuilding Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria.
I love Puerto Rico. And she's in a lot of pain. And there's a lot of people that have turned their backs on her. And she needs to be rebuilt. And I cannot be here in the 4th Congressional District and rebuilding the home of my mom and my dad, where my wife was born, a place that I love so much. And I'm gonna work really hard until she's completely rebuilt to 21st century standards. But I can't do them both.
Congressmember Gutierrez also endorsed Cook County Board Commissioner Jesus Chuy Garcia to replace him as congressman. Meanwhile, the Associated Press reports that FEMA, that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, gave more than $30 million in contracts to a newly created Florida company which failed to deliver any aid to Puerto Rico. Bronze Star LLC was supposed to provide emergency tarps and plastic sheeting for repairs, but never delivered any supplies. FEMA canceled the contract without paying any of the money, but the months-long delay in getting tarps to people in Puerto Rico means many homes have been further and unnecessarily damaged by rainfall after the hurricane. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.
Well, Juan, before we move on to the tax bill and speak with Heather McGhee of Demos, what about this news, this double header here? You've got Luis Gutierrez saying he's stepping down, and then you've got the news about Puerto Rico.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to the issue of Gutierrez, this is a complete surprise. He was actually filing petitions to run again for Congress, and suddenly, within a day after filing those petitions, then has an announcement that he is resigning from Congress and that he won't run again. I mean, he'll serve out his term, but won't run again in 2018. And immediately then endorses Jesus Chuy Garcia to be the successor to his seat. Now, of course, by naming Garcia at the very last moment, is because petitions in Chicago to run for office have to be in very soon for a primary that's in March. So he basically precludes any one of numerous other challengers that may have decided to run for the seat. At the same time, he takes Chuy Garcia out of a potential run for mayor of Chicago against Rahm Emanuel.
A rematch.
A rematch, right. In 2019, Rahm Emanuel has already said he's going to run for a third term. Chuy Garcia was the leading candidate to run against Rahm Emanuel. But now...
And he lost in a close race. And at the time, Laquan McDonald, the killing of the teenager and what the city was doing about it and covering up wasn't known. It came out right after the election.
That was the key issue that perhaps allowed Rahm Emanuel to win. Had the Laquan McDonald tape come out before the runoff, I have major doubts as to whether Rahm Emanuel would have defeated Chuy Garcia. But now the problem is both Chuy Garcia and Luis Gutierrez have a long history. They were part of the young Latino radicals who joined the Harold Washington mayoral campaign. They both considered themselves sons of Harold Washington, but they have diverged in numerous ways because Chuy Garcia has maintained, some would say, a more progressive politics. He backed Bernie Sanders for president, whereas Luis Gutierrez backed Hillary Clinton in the most recent election. But now they seem to have come back together, at least, and Chuy accepting.
Didn't Luis Gutierrez back
and Chuy accepting now Luis's support for him to replace him in his seat.
And did Luis Gutierrez support Rahm Emanuel against Chuy Garcia?
Yes, and in the mayoral race, Luis Gutierrez did support Rahm Emanuel. Now, in fairness, as Chuy Garcia has said, Luis backed Rahm Emanuel before Chuy entered the race, because as you remember, it was the president of the teachers union in Chicago who was supposed to be running for mayor, but then when she got sick, Karen Lewis, then Chuy Garcia came in at the last moment to replace him. By then, Luis Gutierrez had already endorsed Rahm Emanuel and therefore decided not to switch.
So this, in a sense, would be taking Chuy Garcia out of this rematch that he could very well win with Rahm Emanuel.
Right, because Rahm Emanuel is not a popular person in Chicago these days.
Do you think Luis Gutierrez might run for governor of Puerto Rico?
I doubt it. I don't think that the people of Puerto Rico, as much as Luis is a Puerto Rican and is identified with the island, he's still considered a U.S. Puerto Rican. And I find it hard to believe that the people of Puerto Rico would decide they don't have anybody on their island who could be governor except someone who comes from Chicago. He
said he wouldn't run for governor of Illinois, but he did not rule out a run for the presidency of the United States.
Right, and I think that's entirely possible, and it's certainly that we've seen from other members of Congress who have run that they can at least raise key issues, even if they don't win. And I think that Luis has already staked out his identification throughout the nation as the leading voice on immigration reform. And that was, to me, the most surprising thing, that he's worked for so many years to achieve comprehensive immigration reform, and now is resigning when the job is not done, when the comprehensive immigration reform has not been won. So
and he has a great deal of power in Congress.
Yes, and I think he's very influential there. So it is a surprise. It's definitely a surprise, certainly for the national Latino community and for Chicago politics.
And finally, Puerto Rico, this new news that AP broke about a Florida company getting $30 million that they did not follow through on. This follows up on the Whitefish company getting $300 million that the governor of Puerto Rico has now, Puerto Rico has now canceled, but called Whitefish Company for the hometown of Ryan Zinke, the Interior Secretary in Montana.
Well, what a surprise. FEMA has failed once again. I think that anyone who has followed the history of FEMA through all these natural disasters and that have occurred in the United States knows that the agency, through both Democratic and Republican administrations, has been one that wastes money, that provides contracts to friends, because here you have a company that was only formed a few days before it got a contract. How does that happen? With no track record, with no other federal contracts in the past, for you to be given a multi-million-dollar contract to provide tarps, which is not exactly rocket science, and they failed to do so. So it's just another one of the sad chapters in this history of not only of the federal government's failure to respond to natural disasters, but also of the particular problems of Puerto Rico as well.
Well, on to the tax bill.
Well, Republicans are rapidly pushing forward with their efforts to pass President Trump's tax plan, which would overhaul the code in order to shower billions of dollars in tax cuts upon the richest Americans, including President Trump's own family. On Tuesday, the Senate Budget Committee passed the Senate version of the plan, with all Republicans on the panel voting for it and all Democrats voting against. Protesters disrupted the committee hearing Tuesday with chants of "Kill the bill, don't kill us." Several were arrested. The plan will now go to the full Senate for a vote as early as Thursday. The Senate bill slashes the corporate tax rate and gives further tax cuts to wealthy business owners. It would also repeal a key provision of the Affordable Care Act, the requirement that most Americans have health insurance. Experts say recalling this provision, known as the individual mandate, would cause the cost of health insurance to skyrocket. The vote came after President Trump met with Senate Republicans on Capitol Hill. He later told reporters he thinks the Republican tax bill will be, quote, very popular.
We're in a very good position in terms of the meeting we just had over at the Capitol with the Republican senators. It was outstanding. I think we have tremendous support. I was just informed by Mitch that we had a unanimous vote from the Republican side, at least. We had a unanimous vote on the tax bill. And it goes now the next step, and I think we're going to get it passed. I think it's going to pass, and it's going to be very popular. It's going to have lots of adjustments before it ends. But the end result would be a very, very massive, the largest in the history of our country, tax cut.
Democrats have had nearly no say in crafting the tax plan. House and Senate Majority Leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer boycotted a meeting on Tuesday with Trump and Republican lawmakers after he appeared to refuse to negotiate on key issues like spending, health care, and immigration. Trump then held a news conference between two empty chairs with signs for Pelosi and Schumer on them.
They want tax increases, and we want major tax decreases. So they decided not to show up. They've been all talk, and they've been no action. And now it's even worse. Now it's not even talk. So they're not showing up for the meeting.
The image of President Trump surrounded by two empty chairs has appeared to backfire against him and has become a meme. Meanwhile, the House Democratic leader Pelosi responded on Twitter saying, "Real Donald Trump now knows that his verbal abuse will no longer be tolerated. His empty chair photo op showed he's more interested in stunts than in addressing the needs of the American people. Poor Ryan and McConnell relegated to props. Sad," she tweeted. This comes as a House version of the tax bill passed earlier this month would cut the corporate tax rates from 35% to 20%. As the year winds down with no legislative achievements since Trump became president, Republicans say they're determined to pass tax reform by the end of the year. Well, for more, we're joined by Heather McGhee, president of Demos and Demos Action. Heather, wow, a lot has happened in these last 24 hours. Talk about this tax bill that was passed and what the House is also considering.
This tax bill is an outrage. At a time of record economic inequality, when half of American families couldn't pay a $400 bill without going into debt or selling something, this bill would give hundreds of billions of dollars to the wealthiest 1%. It is a sop, not actually to the Republican base, because this is an enormously unpopular bill. If there's one silver lining, it's that the American people are not falling for the Republican tax scam. They understand that it's just going to the wealthy and big corporations that they think are already running away with the store. And so you've got a bill that is historically unpopular. The only bill in polling history that's been more unpopular has actually been the Republican repeal of Obamacare. And yet they, on the Hill, think that this is a political imperative. Why is that? And they've been willing to say it because their donors, some of the wealthiest people in this country, are saying, we will turn off the spigot if you do not pass this tax cut for me, my businesses, and my heirs. It's disgusting. It's immoral. It's going to make it harder for working class and middle class families to buy a house, to pay down student debt, and go to college. And the CBO recently said that it's going to raise taxes. This massive Trump tax cut is going to cut his taxes and those of his children, but it's going to raise taxes on people making under $30,000 almost immediately.
And even those folks in the middle class who supposedly will get tax cuts, those tax cuts, many of them will expire after 10 years, whereas those tax cuts for the wealthy and for the corporations are permanent tax cuts? That's right. That's exactly right, Juan. So within 10 years, families making under $75,000 a year will definitely see a tax increase. We're also very aware people who live in states where their state and local governments actually invest in their communities and have higher property and income taxes, mostly blue states, are going to not be able to deduct as much of that tax, much of that tax that they pay. And so it is going to put pressure on state and local governments to cut taxes as well. We are seeing a hollowing out of our national treasure. We are seeing nearly $2 trillion added to the deficit and the debt. And honestly, the big concern for us on that is think about all of the missed opportunities, the way that we could be investing in our infrastructure to stop poisoning our families, the way we could be transitioning to a clean energy economy, creating free college, affordable childcare, and health care. We could really do so much with these funds, and instead we are giving it to corporations and people who have never been richer and never been more profitable.
Let's go to Senator Bernie Sanders at a hearing talking about the tax bill's impact on the federal budget.
How many hours have I sat here and have you sat there, and we've seen all the charts and all the discussions about how terrible the deficit is, what it means, leaving this burden to our kids and our grandchildren. We heard all of that rhetoric year after year, and now we have a bill that raises the deficit by $1.4 trillion.
So $1.4 trillion. It raises the deficit. And then talk about the individual mandate and what affordable health care, what this is going to mean for that.
Well, those of us who follow this closely never believed the Republican sort of chicken hawking about the deficit. We knew it was always about an ideological desire to shrink government so that they could cut taxes. And so what they're doing is cutting taxes and shrinking government, and it doesn't matter. The ruse that they're using is saying that that these tax cuts will grow the economy and therefore somehow pay for themselves. 41 out of 42 economists of all ideological stripes surveyed by the University of Chicago said that this massive tax cut would lead to no substantial economic growth. And CEOs are agreeing. They're saying if you give us a windfall without there being any change in the underlying dynamics, without more customers coming into our shops, because working and middle-class people just don't have enough money to be fueling this consumer economy, we're just going to give that money to our investors and our shareholders. So it's going to be yet another aspect of the windfall that's not going to create middle-class good jobs. Workers just don't have the bargaining power to make that kind of a windfall to corporations translate into their pockets.
I want to ask you about two other aspects of this tax reform. One is where the Senate version of the bill is actually worse in some ways than the House, because there were some Republican senators who were concerned about the so-called pass-throughs, if you could talk about that, these LLCs that are basically used by lawyers and real estate people, and that they want a better cut for those who are use LLCs or limited liability companies. Can you talk about that?
That's right. So law firms, even hedge funds, lots of wealthy people who have business income that they get from, various endeavors.
Trump has like 500 of them.
The entire Trump organization, the vast majority of it itself is a pass-through. So that money comes in not into a separate business, but just comes straight through as personal income, and today is taxed at personal income. And because the vast majority of these people, these business owners, are in the 1%, they have the highest marginal tax rate. This would change it so that it would be that lower corporate tax rate that they're slashing. And so it would be a huge windfall to a lot of the people who constitute the Republican political donor base.
And what has happened to a pet peeve of mine has been what I call the amnesty for tax dodging corporations. Repatriation of money from overseas, where basically the plan that both many Democrats as well as Republicans supported was to retroactively lower the taxes that they haven't already paid so that they can repatriate them to the United States. What's happened to that in the bill?
That's you put it exactly as it is. And then they're going to have a 0% tax rate on foreign profits. So a lot of analysts are saying this will encourage even more companies to create operations overseas. So it would actually potentially make the job situation that we have even worse.
And the individual mandate.
And, Republicans are obsessed with undoing President Obama's legacy. And so they want to go back at the incredibly unpopular attempt to repeal affordable health care in this country. And so they want to get rid of the individual mandate. The effect of that will be to make health insurance premiums go up for everyone. And if you look at the different just bread and butter issues that American families are struggling with, student debt, being able to afford a home, child care, health care, all of those things could go up considerably for working and middle-class families, while rich families get even more money for just opening an envelope from their
And you mentioned the effect on students. Well, today there are 44 graduate student walkouts planned around the country to protest a measure that is tucked away in the budget that passed the House earlier this month. That measure would amount to a pay cut of thousands of dollars for graduate students by reclassifying their tuition waivers as taxable income.
Students say the move could diminish the number of students who will even consider graduate school and hurt the chances for current students of finishing, impacting critical research. For more, we're joined from Hilliard, Ohio, by Jenna Freudenberg, a fourth-year graduate student in astronomy at Ohio State University and organizer with the Save Graduate Education movement, who's joining Heather McGhee in this discussion. Jenna, welcome to Democracy Now! Explain exactly what is in the House bill.
Thanks for having me. Yes, so the particular provision in the House bill that concerns graduate students the most is this provision that would reclassify our tuition waivers and tuition reductions as taxable income. The way that graduate education, especially for those of us pursuing PhDs, has proceeded in this country for many years is that we provide research and teaching services as part of our work as graduate students, and in exchange for that, that, we receive usually quite modest stipends, and we receive tuition waivers because universities recognize it's not economical for students to go into debt or to be unable to support themselves while they complete their PhDs. So this is the way it's been for quite a while. Under these new provisions, the waivers and the reductions that we receive in tuition would be taxed, and this would result in tax increases of hundreds and hundreds of percent. Even for public university students, the situation is even more dire for students at private universities where the tuition is higher. So this is the particular provision we are most concerned about. However, this is just one of a number of troubling provisions in both the House and the Senate versions of the bill that target higher education. For example, under one of the versions of the bill, we would no longer be able to deduct our student loan interest payments from our taxes. The lifetime learning credit is going to be eliminated. And as you were discussing earlier, the state and local tax deductions are going to be eliminated, which are a major way that states are incentivized to provide funding for their public higher education systems. So this really is an assault on higher education, and it's something that graduate students in particular are finding very concerning.
What are your plans today?
So today we have about 50 universities at this point that have organized their own grassroots actions to protest this bill. At my university, Ohio State, we're actually hosting a teach-in and a grade-in where we are going to be publicly performing our work as academic laborers. We're going to be grading, we're going to be doing our research, we're going to be hearing from our colleagues about how this tax bill will affect them. At other universities, students are staging walkouts out of their classrooms, students are holding rallies on their campus quads, students are holding phone banking sessions to contact their local lawmakers. So we have a whole wide variety of grassroots actions, and we've decided to band together and hold all of those actions on the same day to send the message as this bill progresses through Congress that it would be terrible for grad students, terrible for higher education, and we strongly oppose it and urge our lawmakers to vote against it.
And have you been able to identify any particular lawmakers, especially, let's say in the Senate, who might be open to pressure by students across the country or in particular states?
Well, it's a bit of a tricky one in the Senate because the Senate version of the bill does not have this particular provision that we've been discussing that would tax our tuition waivers. That particular provision is in the House version of the bill, and we've identified some lawmakers in the House that we've been trying to pressure. For example, Senator Pat Tiberi, who is the representative for the Ohio 12th District near Columbus here, is on the House Ways and Means Committee. He had a major hand in crafting this bill and will be instrumental in any future changes that might have to occur as part of a reconciliation process should this bill proceed through the Senate. So we're seeking public commitments from him, from other local Central Ohio lawmakers for my group, and for other local lawmakers for the other schools who are protesting today, as well as from our senators, that they will publicly commit to opposing any version of the bill that attacks higher education in this way.
So, Heather McGee, what is gained by this and the profound effect this will have on education? I mean, schools across the country could lose half their graduate students who simply cannot afford to do this anymore.
We have seen over the past decade, really, an increasing campaign by the right-wing media to demonize higher education. And if you think about what are the sources of progressive values and power, they are labor unions, they are the government itself, the idea of a public good itself, and they are higher education. Republicans know that as you get more educated, you are more likely to hold progressive values and vote for a Democrat. I think this is very clearly part of a campaign to make college the enemy, to make higher education no longer the route to upward mobility that it has been. And there's no reason in an economy where getting a bachelor's degree is now the ticket to a middle-class job, which it shouldn't be, right? Working-class jobs shouldn't be poverty jobs. We should have strong unions and high labor standards so that you don't have to college to get a degree. But that's what the conservative economic system has created, and now they want to make that degree even more out of reach. One thing I did want to say, I think that the walkouts and the protests that Jenna and her colleagues are organizing are amazing, and we do still have some opportunity to kill this bill.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. What can be done with the steamroller, despite what public opinion is? The Republican majority and the president seem determined to get a bill passed in the next couple of weeks. And then, of course, the reconciliation of two bad bills will then begin. What can people who want to stop this do?
So I would recommend that people go to a source like indivisible.org that really gives excellent calling tools for you to be able to call your senator. Obviously, if you are in the states of Maine, Tennessee, Arizona, Oklahoma, Kansas, Wisconsin, or Montana, those are the places where Republicans have been on the fence for various reasons. After the press conference yesterday and the meeting with Donald Trump, a few of them said, I might be more willing to vote for the bill, but until they've actually done that roll call vote, people should be calling in, including to their Democratic senators, to make the impression very clear on the Hill that the American people are watching, because they know this is unpopular.
Heather McGhee, we have to wrap up now, and in fact, we're headed to Oklahoma to talk about another issue, to speak with a Cherokee lawyer and attorney about Pocahontas. What is her life story? But I did want to briefly ask you in this last 30 seconds, this latest news, Matt Lauer, NBC has fired him. This follows Charlie Rose. Right now, Congressman Conyers, we hear he may be holding a news conference. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus are also calling for his resignation around issues of sexual harassment. Of course, Harvey Weinstein, your thoughts on this?
This is a moment of reckoning. It is a moment of collective power for women who have felt that they individually could not speak up because men hold so many of the cards in workplaces, in industries. They hold so much of the political power in this country and the economic power. But women are discovering that there is strength in numbers and that they may just be believed. That's a wonderful thing. There is so much more accountability happening, though, on the side of media and in private industry than at the very top in the most powerful seat in this country, which is in the White House. And the idea that Roy Moore, someone who is so clearly a repeated child molester and pedophile, could be endorsed meaningfully by the White House, it makes your skin crawl. And I think that the Republican Party has a reckoning that they have to do about their morality as they take away children's health care, as they bankrupt our future and endorse a pedophile.
You make a link between the tax plan and patriarchy.
Absolutely. I mean, this value system, that there's this sort of hierarchy of human value, that some groups of people are just worth more than others because they have more money and more power, is a part of a system. Racial hierarchy, patriarchy, white supremacy, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it play out very much where women, people of color, and the next generation are going to suffer from this tax plan.
And finally, of course, this is all happening under President Trump. President Trump himself has been accused by at least 16 women of sexual assault, now questioning even the tape that he did not question before, where he is caught on tape boasting about sexually assaulting women.
I don't think he's questioning it. I think he realizes from the first year of his presidency that he can lie and repeat a lie, and that some people will believe it, and that's what he's doing now.
Heather McGhee, head of Demos, thanks so much for being with us and Demos Action. And Jenna Freudenberg, Ohio State graduate student with Save Graduate Education. Thank you for joining us from Hilliard, Ohio. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we head to Tulsa, Oklahoma. President Trump attempted to insult the Massachusetts Congresswoman, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, by calling her Pocahontas. Who was Pocahontas? We'll speak with a Cherokee writer. Stay with us. The world is going up in flames by the late Charles Bradley. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
President Trump is winding down Native American Heritage Month by opening the door to new drilling and mining on land considered sacred by tribal nations. On Monday, Trump plans to travel to Utah to announce plans to shrink the Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments. U.S. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke recommended both sites be reduced in order to make way for more industrial activity on the land. 5 tribes, the Hopi, Navajo Nation, Ute, Mountain Ute tribe, Pueblo Zuni, and the Ute Indian tribe, say they will sue to stop the change. This comes after Trump attempted to insult Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren by referring to Warren as Pocahontas during a White House ceremony honoring Navajo code talkers. Native Americans who served in the Marines during World War II and used the Navajo language in order to transmit encoded information.
I just want to thank you because you're very, very special people. You were here long before any of us were here. Although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas. But you know what? I like you because you are special. You are special people.
President Trump has frequently attacked Senator Warren by calling her Pocahontas. Warren says her family is part Cherokee. Trump held the ceremony honoring the Navajo military veterans in front of a portrait of the former President Andrew Jackson, who is called Indian Killer by the Cherokees. Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, leading to the forced displacement and death of tens of thousands of Native Americans, a march that became known as the Trail of Tears. This is Elizabeth Warren speaking later on Monday.
Had to throw out a racial slur.
Or lead.
He seems to think that if he keeps doing that, somehow he's going to shut me up. It hadn't worked in the past. It's not going to work in the future.
We're going to go right now to Mary Catherine Nagel, a citizen of Cherokee Nation, a partner at Pipestem Law PC, a law firm dedicated to the restoration of tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction. We thank you so much for joining us, Mary Catherine Nagel. Can you respond to what took place in this Navajo ceremony, the code talkers being honored? Everything that happened there, from the portrait of Andrew Jackson to what President Trump said about Senator Warren.
Thank you so much for having me. First, I would just like to say that I read and respect the remarks made by the Navajo Nation president, as well as other elected leaders of Navajo Nation, criticizing the president for using an opportunity where he should have been commemorating and giving gratitude and thanks to the sacrifice of veterans who risked their lives to save the United States, and using that ceremony as an opportunity to antagonize a political opponent is wholly inappropriate. And so I certainly stand with the folks from Navajo Nation who have expressed their dismay that the president would use such an opportunity to attack one of his political opponents. I think it is not without irony that he made this attack in a moment when he should have been honoring the sacrifice of the Navajo code talkers in front of a statue of, a portrait of Andrew Jackson. You know, being a citizen of Cherokee Nation, I have a lot of experience with the legacy of Andrew Jackson and what he stood for. When he ran for president in 1828, his platform was the eradication of tribal nations. That is the eradication of tribal jurisdiction, tribal sovereignty, and our indigenous languages. So ultimately, he failed. We're still here today. Cherokee Nation is still here. Navajo Nation is still here. The languages are somewhat endangered, but we are still here, and many of our citizens are speaking them. If Andrew Jackson had been completely successful in his efforts, the Navajo code talkers, the Cherokee code talkers, the Choctaw code talkers, all of the code talkers who assisted the United States Army in World War I and II would not have been able to do that. And so I think it is ironic that he was standing in front of a portrait of a man who tried to wipe out tribal nations and tribal languages and failed.
And Mary Catherine Nagel, his introduction of Pocahontas into this ceremony and this continued, repeated attempt to, from his point of view, smear Senator Elizabeth Warren by calling her Pocahontas. who was Pocahontas for those folks who only see her as a Disney character?
Right, and I think most Americans at this point understand her as a Disney character. Her real true story has been commodified and retold in a false narrative that celebrates her union with her abuser. She was a survivor of a form of violence, of colonial violence, at a time when Native women were primary targets because the colonial powers who came over here from 1492 and even past 1776 knew that a primary way of destroying a tribal nation, an indigenous nation, is to attack the women. As Native women, we give birth to the next generation of our tribal citizens. If you eradicate the women, you eradicate the nation, and then you're able to colonize the area. So in that way, Pocahontas was a prime target. She survived rape, she survived a kidnapping, and she ended up dying, some say maybe perhaps she was murdered, in 1621, about almost 400 years ago, in England, and is still buried there. She was never brought home to be repatriated and buried with her relatives here on this side of the ocean. So really, in many respects, her life is quite tragic. There's a lot that we don't know, but there's a lot that we do know, and certainly the stories that we do know from her descendants and the Pamunkey tribe, which is her sovereign nation, are not being told today. And so I think for many Native women, when they see someone in power, especially the President of the United States or a cultural icon like Nicki Minaj, misuse and abuse Pocahontas' name without sharing her story, it reminds Native women survivors that our stories are hardly ever shared. Most of the time, our stories are silenced. And it's not a coincidence that Pocahontas' story, her real story, is not shared. And at the same time, that violence that she experienced back in the 1600s continues today. And unfortunately, what began as a form of colonial conquest has now transformed into a contemporary cultural norm, where violence against Native women is practiced and accepted in the United States. And in fact, our Native women suffer the highest rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and murder, higher than any other population in the United States today.
I wanted to go to a news conference Monday. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders defending President Trump's decision to attack Senator Elizabeth Warren at the Navajo Code Talkers ceremony. She was questioned by reporters.
Sarah, at the event that the president just did with the Navajo Code Talkers, he referred to Pocahontas being in the Senate. Why did he feel the need to say something that is offensive to many people while honoring the Navajo Code Talkers, these genuine American
I think
heroes?
What most people find offensive is Senator Warren lying about her heritage to advance her career.
Now, she said it was a racial slur. She said it was a racial slur. What is your response to that?
I think that's a ridiculous response.
That was Sarah Huckabee Sanders responding to questions about using the term Pocahontas. I wanted to get your response to that, Mary Catherine Nagle, very quickly.
Sure. So many people have said that to me, too. Why are you so offended? If you are truly Cherokee, you should be thankful that the president is calling out a fake Indian. But my response is, when did Pocahontas become synonymous with fake? She was not fake. She was a real woman, a survivor of rape and colonial conquest. Well, actually, she wasn't a survivor. She lost her life. And so long as we think that her name is synonymous or an adjective for fake and should be used and that her story should be erased to attack the president's political opponents, we're actually going to lose the real story and the real message that we so desperately need to hear in the United States today. And that's just the reality of what Native women back then and today had to survive and endure just to continue to be here.
You're talking about violence against women, and we're joined now via Democracy Now! Video stream by Matthew Lone Bear, brother of Olivia Lone Bear, who went missing October 25th in Newtown, North Dakota. She's the mother of 5. Matthew's part of the daily ground search for his sister. The Bismarck Tribune reports 3 affiliated tribes chairman Mark Fox is talking to federal, state, and tribal leaders about getting more support for the search. In addition to Mary Catherine Nagle, we are joined now by Matt Lone Bear. Can you tell us what you know about your sister?
She was outgoing, and yeah, she liked to hang out at casinos and bars, and she also, you know, really cared for her children.
And do you know where she is?
No clue. We've been searching. This would be our 29th day. Yeah, the last known video that we found, she's going west on Main Street in Newtown. It was taken off a bank camera. So that's the most updated version that we have. She still has a vehicle.
When you hear this story, Mary Catherine Nagel, your thoughts? Certainly Olivia Lone Bear is not the first Native American woman who has gone missing in North Dakota.
No, and I just want to say first and foremost that, Matthew, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your entire family, and that no one should have to go through this. But unfortunately, as you point out, Amy, this is all too common. And we have the highest rates across the United States, again, in Indian country, of violence, but in particular in North Dakota, where the rates of oil extraction have skyrocketed since 2005 in the Bakken oil boom. As a result of that, over 100,000 men from outside of the state of North Dakota have moved to the state of North Dakota to live in man camps that the oil companies have set up. And unfortunately, as Senator Heidi Heitkamp has noted, as the former U.S. Attorney for the state of North Dakota has noted, the resulting rates of violence, drug, of course, and crime and burglary have skyrocketed, but also in particular domestic violence and sexual assault, including rape and sex trafficking. And numerous leaders, both at the state and federal level, have now noticed that North Dakota, some of the towns in North Dakota within the Bakken boom and some within the Fort Berthold Reservation, where Olivia is from, now have some of the highest rates of sex trafficking in the United States.
And Matthew Lone Bear, could you talk about how local authorities have been dealing with the disappearance of your sister? Do you feel that they are making this a priority?
No, I think there definitely needs to be a policy put into place here. Definitely, we're kind of all learning together right now, and yeah, I mean, we still haven't gotten any water support from the local PD, but I think it's all new to us altogether. So there definitely needs to be a policy put into place.
And what is your family calling for now, Matthew?
We do still need water support. We do need people on the ground, definitely, because the Fort Berthold Reservation is over 1 million, or just about 1 million acres. So that's a lot of ground to cover. If the more people we can get in before the snow falls and before the lake freezes, we want to get as much done as possible before then.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Matthew Lone Bear, brother of Olivia Lone Bear, missing from Newtown, North Dakota. We'll continue to follow Olivia's story. And Mary Catherine Nagel joining us from Oklahoma, a citizen of Cherokee Nation and a partner at the Pipestem law firm dedicated to the restoration of tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we'll get an update on what's happening after the Honduran elections with the opposition candidate ahead. What is happening? Why aren't results being released? Stay with us.
Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo. 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 Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo, porque no tenemos miedo. Están atrás, van para atrás, piensan atrás, son el atrás, están detrás de su armadura militar. Nos ven reír, nos ven luchar, nos ven amar, nos ven jugar, nos ven detrás de su armadura militar. Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo. Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo. Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo. Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo.
Liliana Felipe performing the protest anthem, "They are afraid of us because we are not afraid." I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Tensions are rising in Honduras, where the Electoral Court still hasn't released the full results from Sunday's presidential election. The U.S.-backed President Juan Orlando Hernandez was widely expected to win the race, despite growing concerns about his consolidation of power and his militarization of the country. But in an apparent upset, partial election results released on Monday showed his main challenger, Salvador Nasralla, leading Hernandez by 5 points. Nasralla is the head of a newly formed coalition of center and left political parties called the Alliance Against the Dictatorship. The alliance includes a leftist party of former President Manuel Zelaya, who was ousted in the U.S.-backed coup in 2009. This is Salvador Nasralla speaking Tuesday.
Even though we have a 5-point advantage, they can still try to steal the election from us. I'm asking the Supreme Election Tribunal, which right now is not supreme because it obeys the orders of its boss, the president. Fulfill your responsibility and release today a partial verdict about the election results.
Many of Nasralla's supporters are concerned the Electoral Court may now be trying to rig the vote in Hernandez's favor. On Tuesday, the Electoral Court released new partial results showing the gap between Nasralla and Hernandez has narrowed, with Nasralla now leading by only 2 percentage points. This is Guillermo Valle, the head of the Innovation and Unity Party, which is part of the coalition that makes up the Alliance Against the Dictatorship, also speaking Tuesday.
We've sent out an urgent alert. For us, it's critical. It's very serious. This situation where the conspiratorial traitors of the government are practically carrying out a coup d'etat.
What are we going to do? Can you talk about this? For more, we're joined by Ciapa Portillo. She's an assistant professor of Chicano and Latino studies at Pitzer College in California. She just returned from Honduras, where she was an election observer. Professor Portillo, can you hear us? We were hoping, we're having a little sound problem right now. We're going to go to a bit of a music break, go back to that music, and see if we can get her on the telephone.
Tenemos miedo, nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo. 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 Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo, porque no tenemos miedo. Están atrás, van para atrás, piensan atrás, son el atrás, están detrás de su armadura militar. Nos ven reír, nos ven luchar, nos ven amar, nos ven jugar, nos ven detrás de su armadura militar. Nos tienen miedo porque no tenemos miedo.
Again, that was Liliana Felipe performing the protest anthem. They are afraid of us because we are not afraid. And unfortunately, we're afraid to inform you we could not get our next guest on the phone. We hope to speak with her tomorrow, Ciapa Portillo. We're having some disconnect with our studio in California. But we, of course, will update folks at DemocracyNow.org about the latest on the Honduran elections. So close, the opposition candidate actually ahead of President Hernandez. Not clear why the election committee is not releasing the information that they have so far. And we'll give you more information at DemocracyNow.org. That does it for our show. Congratulations to Democracy Now! Producer Hani Massoud and his wife Aisha on the birth of their daughter, Amina. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Charina Nadura, Amel Ahmed, Nat Needham, Mike DeFilippo, and Miguel Noguera. Paul Huckabee are our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grant, David Prude, Ariel Boone, Vesta Godars, and Carl Marxer. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.